Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good evening. Welcome to IAIS webinar, this time on zoo and the animal well-being during COVID-19 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed delighted to have two distinguished speakers tonight, Dr. Muhammad Danial Felix bin Abdullah, former Deputy Director Zoo Negara, and Mrs. Nur Zakia Hanum Binti Mohd Noh, Senior Assistant Director PERHILITAN. Ladies and gentlemen, among the issues that caught the attention of Malaysians in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic is the case of Zoo Negara Malaysia facing a financial crisis due to the loss of income caused by the third wave of lockdowns. Zoo Negara's closure since the Conditional Movement Control Order has made it difficult for it to generate enough income to cover for animal care expenses totaling about 1 million ringgit Malaysia per month. This has raised concerns for the well-being of the zoo animals. For many, zoo animals are not supposed to be victims of COVID-19. Humans have kept animals in captivity for centuries, and modern zoos, as we know today, became popular only in the 18th century. From an Islamic perspective, every animal deserves care and affection. Cruelty towards them are clearly prohibited in Islam. It is narrated by Ibn Umar that the Prophet ﷺ said, "A woman entered the fire, hell, because of a cat which she had tied, neither giving it food nor setting it free to eat from the vermin of the earth." While there are opinions that keeping animals in zoos is inhumane, perhaps we should also look into the importance of zoos and the reason why they were established in the first place. There are three main focus areas of a zoo. That is conservation, education, and scientific research. Living in the zoo, animals are treated with respect and all their needs are attended. Also, zoos are often inspected by governmental institutions and they are subjected to specific regulations under World Association of Zoos and Aquarium, what we call it WAZA, a Switzerland-based organization as the highest member body for the world zoos. As stated in WAZA's Code of Ethics, its members should make all efforts in their power to encourage substandard zoos and aquarium to improve and reach appropriate standards. If it is clear that the funding or the will to improve is not there, WAZA would support the closure of such zoos and aquarium. Ladies and gentlemen, before I pass over to the speakers, let me read a bit of the profile. Dr. Muhammad Danial Felix received his doctorate of veterinary medicine from UPM in 1991. His vast experience in veterinary field started since 1991, serving companies such as Kumpulan Gatri Berhad, VS Niaga Sdn Berhad, and ASSB. In 2004, he joined Zoo Negara Malaysia as a veterinary doctor and later appointed as Deputy Director of Zoo Negara Malaysia. Dr. Felix served Zoo Negara Malaysia for 10 years before establishing his own SMMC Animal Centre and Klinik Haiwan dan Surgery Saujana Puchong. Currently, he also provides captive animals management consultancy to various zoos and animal parks in Malaysia, such as Kemaman Zoo, Lost World of Tambun Wildlife Park, 99 Wonderland Park, KL Tower Mini Zoo, Zoo Johor, and Brunei Jurudong Park Playground, and many more. Our second speaker, Mrs. Nur Zakia Hanum Binti Mohd Noh, graduated with a degree in biology from UKM in 2005, and she was the State Director of Jabatan Penelitian Negeri Melaka and has a brief experience working as an officer at the Zoo Melaka from 2010 until 2012. Mrs. Nur Zakia Hanum is currently a Senior Assistant Director in Zoological Park Division, PERHILITAN. With that, I would like to call upon Dr. Felix, if you may start first. How are you, Dr. Felix?
Thank you, Prof. Dr. Azam. Okay, Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera semua.
Waalaikumsalam.
Okay, so basically I'll be talking on zoo and animal well-being during the COVID-19. These are the animals I'll be touching are those captive managed in zoo, not the other animals that you talk about, dogs and cats. Okay. Okay. First, what is zoo? So basically, it is an establishment which maintains a collection of animals, typically in a park or garden for study, conservation, or display to the public. Like Prof. Dr. Mohamed Azam mentioned, the main activities are conservation, education, research, and of course, recreation. Why recreation? Because we do need to generate a bit of income to be self-sustainable. Talking further into that, the zoo is actually an ex situ conservation place whereby it is where we relocate the endangered or rare species from their natural habitat to protected areas equipped for their protection and preservation, which the zoo will try to provide. I'm sure just now, Prof. Dr. Mohamed pun did touch on the history of the zoo. Here, the first real zoo was established by the Queen Hatshepsut in Egypt, followed by later in China. Okay, basically the zoo then was as a show of power. How powerful is the kingdom? That is where they show it, and then it's basically for sports. You will remember the movie Gladiator, the Roman Gladiator, where they fight with animals, and then later they found out it may be a bit too cruel to the animals. They revert to circuses. But of late, circuses are not acceptable anymore. So the zoo will have to take the role of displaying animals. Now, the world oldest zoo is the Vienna Zoo, okay, which is still in existence now. That is the world oldest zoo. And then talking about the biggest zoo, you will find one in India, the Sri Venkateswara Zoological Park, which is 5,532 acres, which is the biggest, actually the biggest zoo in the world. And then San Diego, USA, which is also pretty big. And later on, I'll touch more on San Diego Zoo because it's the #1 zoo in the world. North Carolina Zoo deserves a mention because it is the world's biggest natural habitat zoo. These are the 5 main functions of zoo. As mentioned earlier, conservation is what we do, basically where we breed the animal either to sustain the captive population in the zoo so that we do not have to get or deplete animals from the wild. And also we do breeding for reintroduction programs where there is a need. And then after that, is recreation. Recreation is important because you need people to come into the zoo. Only then you can do your education program. That is where we do the awareness on conservation, how important it is for us to keep our environment sustainably. And then we also play the role of research into animal behavior, their diets, how best to keep them. And last but not least is basically training for our keepers, because the challenges, zoo is a very dynamic entity. If you were to recall, back then zoo were basically only animals are put into cages, much like what do you call a jail, a prison. But over the years, it have been what do you call the enclosure have been either a single species to a multi-species exhibit, and also it will try to mimic as much as possible the original habitat of the animals that we want to portray. So it's a challenge, not only for the zoo management, but for the zookeepers. That is where training is very important. Talking about the top 5 zoos in the world, #1 is San Diego. San Diego and Singapore Zoo, they will interchange their position. Singapore and so that is why when people come to Zoo Negara before, I used to tell them, okay, you do not make sure you go and visit our neighbor in Singapore, because that is the closest you can get to see the top 5 zoo in the world. And then the third is Prague Zoo in Czechoslovakia, Chester Zoo in UK, and of course the Vienna also the oldest zoo in the world. These are the top 5 zoos in the world. Fortunately, I've been to all of these, all the zoo, and yes, each and every one of the zoo, they have their strengths and weaknesses. Now, talking about WAZA, which Professor Dr. Mohamed Azam mentioned, the World Association of Zoo and Aquarium, which have globally about 400 members. In Malaysia, when I was the director of the zoo, Zoo Negara was the only member of WAZA in Malaysia. All right. And then next we have a regional association with the Southeast Asian Zoo Association, CSR. All the major zoos in Thailand, Indonesia, Brunei, Vietnam, Laos are all there. And then in Malaysia, we have the Malaysian Association of Zoological Parks and Aquaria, which has 22 members. Okay, for your information, in the world, we have roughly about 10,000 zoos. Okay, and then more than half of these are basically in Europe. Talking about locally, while keeping wildlife in captive management, we have to comply with the guidelines like in West Malaysia, there are two acts that we have to follow. There is the Wildlife Conservation Act 2010 and the latest one, the Animal Welfare Act 2015. The aim of this act is basically to safeguard the welfare of the animal, except the difference is that in the Animal Welfare Act, all animals that is not being listed in the Wildlife Conservation Act is covered in the Animal Welfare Act. And then in Sabah and Sarawak, they have a different act. Whatever act that is being followed in West Malaysia is not applicable to Sabah and Sarawak. They have their own akta. Okay, talking about the main focus of animal welfare and well-being, of course, the 5 freedom is very basic. I will touch on it later. And then WAZA, they come up with the 5 domains, which is slightly more looking into the mental well-being of the animals. And then WAZA will enforce this in 2022, 2023. In order for the WAZA members to be a member, they have to comply to that. I will touch on it later. Talking about the 5 freedom. So number 1 is basically freedom of thirst and hunger, meaning there should be the food and water that is available to them. Of course, each particular species have their own diet, so we have to know that. And then freedom from discomfort due to environment. These are basically, we have to provide night stall for them because animals do need time away from, let's say in the case of a zoo, they need time to be on their own after being, displaying themselves in the exhibit until from 9:30 to 5. They need a place on their own. That is where the night stalls are. And that freedom from pain and injury, these are basically provided by the veterinary service. Okay, each zoo, at least the bigger zoo in Malaysia, they have their own full-time vet. Whereas those that cannot afford a full-time vet, they will have to have a consulting vet, which is in order for them, especially those the MASPA members, they have to have to comply with it. It is stated in the ACTA. And then next will be the freedom to express normal behavior, meaning, for example, if you know that particular primate or monkey needs trees, so make sure you provide them branches and tree for them to swing, for example. And then the last but not least is the freedom from fear and distress. This one is basically, for example, you do not put a mouse deer exhibit next to the tiger exhibit, which cause unnecessary stress for them, for example. Now, talking about the 5 domains of animal welfare, which is being adopted by WAZA, these are the things. All the 5 is basically number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are basically, they call it the functional state of that. And then the last one will be, not last, I mean, we have to take care of the mental state. Mental state meaning certain animals which are sociable, we have to provide a group for them. This is, I adopt from the WAZA website. This is what it means, the choice, the mental stimulation, the social needs, the safety needs on the right side of the screen, going back up to come up with the wellness and the well-being of the animal itself. The 5 opportunity to strive, this is being given by the Global Balance Academy. Of course, anyway you talk about animal in captivity, this quote will come to mind, the one by Mahatma Gandhi. I think my other panelists will also touch on this. The greatness of a nation can be judged by the way its animals are being treated. So this is why when I was in Zoo Negara, I always told that to my staff, please give our best to the animals. Talking about the challenges during the pandemic, this is the actual thing that is going to be discussed in slightly detail. Is the challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. Number one will be the biosecurity. Biosecurity meaning areas in the zoo will have to be disinfected, and the new SOP have to be in place, added on whatever SOPs that we have within the zoo. And this will pose a bit of uneasiness among our animals, because when we talk about biosecurity, our keepers or our cleaners will have to use PPE, will have to use face masks. Some of the animals are not used to this because they do not recognize, because a lot of the animals that they have this keeper animal bond, once you put in a face mask, it takes time for them to recognize. I'm sure even our iPhone with face recognition app, if you put a face mask, it's quite difficult for the phone to recognize, similarly to the animal itself. And then talking about like what Prof. Dr. Mohamed Azam mentioned, the revenue, 80% or even more of the revenue will be reduced during lockdown, because it's the tickets, or rather the visitors that comes into the zoo, that provide at least 90% of the money that needs to run and maintain the zoo. And at that time, at that point in time as well, when there's not much revenue, the management will try to scale down. This is where the problem comes in, scaling down of manpower to reduce management costs. Here, what it means is they will try to reduce the manpower, because the zoology department for each zoo will take up at least 80% of the workforce. The non-zoology are the ones like the admin and all that. These are easy for us to ask them to work from home, but those interacting with the animals is quite difficult. But at the same time, it's the cost will be very high for the zoo if they were to maintain 100% of their manpower. Next will be animal behavior and routine change. It's very noticeable, especially those animals that interact very well with us. Once there's no visitors coming in, you will see a noticeable change. It's like they're looking with a bit of a question mark in their eyes, saying, where is everybody? That kind of thing. So it's quite stressful for them. Sometimes we think that, having no visitors should be a breeze, but to some animals, it's the other way around. They feel very uneasy. So what the zoo management does is they will ask some of the keepers, let's say, for example, during their free time, to just be within a visible distance of within the exhibit, to allow the animals to know that, yes, there are human beings around. And then, of course, there's a food supply chain being disrupted, because a lot of the food that we get, especially those fresh food, are being sent in 2 or 3 days into the zoo. Like, for example, vegetable and fruits, because some zoos, they do not have a capacity to store for a very long time. So with the lockdown, there's a food supply chain disrupted, and it affects even, for example, in our case, Cameron Highlands, when there's a lockdown, there's the production of vegetable. At one time, it was a surplus. Then after subsequent months, when the demand or the lockdown is in place, slowly the supply of vegetable is being disrupted. And then something that we don't want to do is, of course, culling of animals. and reduction in conservation breeding program. Some zoos, what they do is that culling means they get rid of animals that may not be productive. Those animals that have reached a certain age and all that, they have to do. Sometimes some deers, what they do is they kill the deer and give it to the carnivores to eat. Malaysian zoo scenario, basically, as mentioned by my colleague, Dr. Kevin Lazarus, he's the chairperson of MASPA. Zoo and Aquaria lost as much as 98% of their funding, right? Fresh produce that would have gone to waste, found a meaning after this is when the first round of lockdown, we managed to get a lot of vegetable from Cameron Highlands coming down to us. And then of late, you can see in the papers, even Marquis, the custom department, any confiscated meat or poultry that will give to the zoo, not just waste it like that. And then of course, we also depend on the enhanced wage subsidy program, which is being introduced by the government, which to a certain extent helps some of the zoos. Ideally, what happened in the zoo during the pandemic is that even though the zoo is closed to visitors, the animals will still have to be fed. The animals exhibit will still have to be cleaned, meaning the keepers will be working as normal, except they do not have to rush for the opening hours, because the most stressful is early in the morning, because you have to rush all your work to make sure that by 9:30 everything is ready, because by 9:30 that's the first group of visitors will come in. So that's very stressful. But during the pandemic, yes, they can take their sweet time, but they still have to work. And then the second one is zoo have taken on additional safety, like I mentioned earlier on, to disinfect the facilities and introduce new SOPs around. Zoos are keeping the animals on schedule before lockdown in response to worries that animals will become accustomed to the absence of human and be skittish when visitors return. This is what I meant by some of the animals that needs consistent human presence. These are some of the pictures that I took about the donation to the zoos and all that. And then of course, the solution and option that is available during the pandemic is the public donation. Yeah, when Zoo Negara mentioned that they did help, I think there was an overwhelming response by the public coming in, dropping in food, vegetable, fruits at their doorstep. And then, of course, there's a waiver moratorium for utility bills and tax loan and repayment that is being introduced by the government, which helps to a certain extent. And then we also do get grants or government aids to help. Of course, tax exemption for donation to the zoo, these have been, hopefully this is being used and introduced. Okay, despite all that, what the zoo have been doing now is some of the zoos, they come up with an innovative and creative idea to stay relevant. Like I said, some zoos are using online technology to keep life going. Many of them live stream, which is also way to increase visitorship and to make known to the public that yes, we are doing well inside the zoo. At the same time, just to make sure that yes, we are still okay. And then some zoos, they even go into social media to post behind the scene photograph and videos, more on to create an awareness that it's not only the human people are suffering, but also the animals in captivity. And then, of course, they conduct virtual fundraising. Some of the zoos in the world, they're doing it. And I think tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, Zoo Negara is going to launch their virtual zoo. And then what we learned during the COVID pandemic is basically, it's yes, this pandemic is actually unprecedented. Okay, so the only way that what we can learn is, of course, to improve on the multi-sectoral approach, which deliver collaboration among various stakeholders, in order to jointly achieve a policy of outcome for sustainable environment conservation program. It's easier said than done, but somehow or other we have to work towards this, because as of now, there's a lot of, they call it not, the stakeholders are not the sectors involved are not having the same vision and mission in mind. So basically, we still have to improve on the multi-sectoral approach, and then of course to continue to create awareness program, which works very well, because now as we see that through social media, there's a lot of it's easy for people to know what's happening, and then there's a lot of people that is willing to help. It's just that we have to spend a bit of time on social media to be there. And then, of course, to intensify the use of technology, AI, and IoT in managing our fauna and flora. There's a lot that can be done in order to be not too dependent on keepers, or rather to relieve the keepers from some of their job specs, but we can use this technology available. Okay, last but not least, now the most important that I find in order for us to be able to take care of the well-being of the animal is learning and studying about the animals we care, which is very, very basic in terms of the origin, the habitat, and behavior. It is only when we understand the animal, then we can help at least introduce or have steps to improve or rather maintain their well-being. And then you have to have the passion and the passion in what we do. Okay, basically all our keepers that I know of, they are very passionate people in the zoo. You can't find those group of people anywhere except in the zoo. And then of course, providing opportunity and choice available to them. These are basically the one of the 5 domains, which is very important, because sometimes we human beings make the mistake of thinking, trying to be the animal, but at the end of the day, it is the animal that have to make the choice. It's just that we have to provide the opportunity for them to choose. That is what we mean. And then, of course, it's not only the animal well-being is being affected. The empathy towards animal caregivers, talking about the keepers. The keepers have to work extra hard in order to maintain the animal well-being. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 is unprecedented global phenomenon affecting everything in the global system. So somehow or other, we have to be open that the new normal will always come in play after this. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Felix, for that lovely presentations pertaining to, I think, the scenario of the zoos. I think you talk a bit of the historical background about the establishment of the World Zoo, and also I think quite a number of important points pertaining to how we can sustain the zoo, especially in Malaysia. And when we talk about Zoo Negara, it reminds me because I came from Taiping. So those days we call it Megastua. We don't call it zoo, we call it Megastua. It's
Yes.
zoo, but the word Megastua is I mean, the terminology that we used before. I think I don't know whether Zoo Negara and the Zoo Taiping. I think perhaps Zoo Taiping is the oldest, or
Yes.
I'm not. I thought so. I thought so.
Yes,
Huh?
Prof. It's the
Yeah.
oldest zoo
Okay.
in Malaysia. Yes.
So all those do in Malaysia, but maybe there will be a question to you, perhaps, because you say that animals also need a time. I mean, to take a break, and I think maybe in the question we will ask you, because in Taiping I was told that there is night safari, so there is a tour
Yeah.
at night. So you are disturbing the animals. they're supposed to sleep. Some of them, I suppose, some of them. But
Yes, yes.
that we will answer perhaps in the Q&A,
Yeah,
perhaps
yes,
session.
exactly.
Okay.
Okay,
So
okay.
thank you very much, Dr. Felix. I think quite a challenging period for, I mean, those who take care of the zoo, especially during this pandemic COVID-19, this
Yes, yes.
COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, we move to Puan Nur Zakia Hanum. Puan Zakia, can you share from your thought about the subject that we're talking?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good evening to all ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude uh, to IAIS for inviting me so that I could represent the Department of Wildlife and National Park, or also known as PERHILITAN, for today's webinar session. So as we all know that just now Dr. Felix already explained to us that tonight's title would be the zoos and animal well-being during COVID-19 pandemic. So inshallah, I will try my best to share what the government has done to help our ZPTs, our zoos during this hard time lah, during this pandemic COVID-19. So before I explain later tonight I will discuss about these three scope of discussion. First, I will explain about the laws and legislation which related to the zoo, brief explanation, and then I will explain explain the government's effort and contribution to our zoos during this pandemic COVID situation. And lastly, we would like to share our hope for future zoo in Malaysia. This is basically a resemblance of what in the future, our government's policy for the zoo in the future. All right, so before I explain further, can everyone see my slides clearly?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
So before I explain further, let's take a look what is exactly the definition of zoo. What is zoo and what is its importance? I think that just now Dr. Felix already touched upon this subject, but let me explain in terms of our actually in terms under the Wildlife Conservation Operation of Zoo Regulation 2013, we have a distinctive definition for zoo. It is very important to make us understand, to people understand that we have certain powers to overlook about the zoo. So basically, under this regulation, the zoo is being defined as any area or premises that keeps or places more than 50 species of animals, in total 100 individuals. So if you have a premise that and you keep more than 50 species and you open your place for the purpose of conservation or education or research or recreation, and you open your place to the public, then you fall under the definition of the zoo. So one need to understand under the definition, the zoo under our regulation and our act, because it determines what type of permit that you need to allow you to conduct any animal exhibition. So there are basically departments, PERHILITAN endorse two types of permit that allow people to operate, to open their place, to open their premises for public visiting. So the one is the Operation Zoo Permit, and currently PERHILITAN already endorsed 13 permits. And another permit is Permanent Exhibition Permit. This is PERHILITAN already endorsed 20 permit. So what's the difference? So any premises that fall under the definition zoo, which I stated here, it falls on, they will need the Operation Zoo Permit. But other than that, maybe you have a place and you have a collection of wild animals which enlists under the Wildlife Conservation Act. And you need to open your premises for public visiting, then you need to have the permanent exhibition permit. So basically these two permits have a slightly different obligation under the Act of Wildlife Conservation Act 2010. So ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you throughout my presentation, I will indicate these two permit holder, these two types of operator that held these two types of permit as ZPT. ZPT here means zoo dan pameran tetap, because the permit operation zoo permit means that permit pengendalian zoo, and permanent exhibition permit means that permit pameran tetap. So it's easier if I just indicate these two permit holder as a ZPT, zoo and pameran tetap. It means that we talk about the operators who have this type of permit. So we need to understand the importance. Why, when we understand the importance, then it's easier for us to react for another step. So just now, Dr. Felix, thank you, Dr. Felix, for make this thing a little bit easier for me. So basically, ZPTs have 5 major roles, 5 major functions. And what are the roles? The first, they have their responsibility towards the conservation, the education, the recreation, research, and training. ZPT is very important in conservation, to support conservation, especially in captive breeding program. Because why ZPT is important in conservation? Probably they are not, they are not they are not directly doing the conservation activities or program. However, they help the governments or other organizations that doing it in terms of provide the expertise, maybe provide some space for captive breeding. Then these individuals from the captive breeding will soon be transferred to rewilding program. And then after a certain hours, certain years or certain period, they will be introduced to its wild habitat or the new habitat. Well, conservation is a very long process and it's costly. So we need, as a government, we need a collaboration. We need together with the other ZPT to help the governments to help the governments materialize the conservation idea here in Malaysia. And second roles for the ZPT is, of course, ZPT plays the important roles to educate the public, so that the public, it helps to create the awareness among the public. So the public will understand the importance to love and care the nature, the animals. Eventually, sometimes zoo, they provide a specific place or a specific corner, and that they usually display many materials to educate people about to appreciate more our nature. So yes, when you have a ZPT, you got extra helper to create awareness among the public. And also, yes, zoo is a recreational place, it's a recreational park. And right now we are stuck in a house for quite some time, I think. So I think if one day the government start to lift its curtain a little bit, so maybe we can enjoy, make a first time, make this to celebrate this. Make a first, let's go to any zoos around you and then relax, have a therapy, enjoy the landscape, enjoy the good air, the sound of the nature. Is actually a good therapy for all of us. So this is part of ZPT's zoos roles in our life. And the fourth is ZPT is important for research, because why? In university, and NGO researchers have some sort of limitation. They have a very limited access to enter any forest or to get close to these majestic animals in its wild habitat. It is because our forest is very dense physically, and our animals have their own ways to camouflage themselves within their environment. So actually, ZAPT zoos, the zoos offer a, offers an easier way for certain study to be taken. For example, if a researcher needs to study about behavior or animal parasite or animal management, they can simply go to the zoo and then have the you can have the animals and do your research. And the easier part to do. And the fifth role for the zoo is also the zoo has the role to train more expert in wildlife management. Let me give a simple example. Every year there are thousands of veterinarian graduate from university. They are successful students. They have a vast knowledge theoretically about animals, but somehow they are lack in terms of experience handling the animals. So when they got a chance to work or to go to any zoos that have a various species of animals, it enables them to learn more about new species. Different species requires different types, different ways to manage, different way to understand, because each species, our animals are very unique. So if a vet manage to put themselves in any of our zoo, is actually a stepping stone for them for their career. And also, it's very good for someone who loves about animals. Maybe they can learn manage many types of various animals in the zoo to be a good person, to be a good keeper that understand the needs of animals. So basically, zoo is very important as a training ground for any individuals in wildlife management. So that's a brief that's a brief explanation about the laws and legislation related to the zoo, and also why the ZPT or the zoo here in Malaysia is very important. Now I will explain to you what are the government's effort and contribution throughout this pandemic COVID. I know this is a very unprecedented event that happens globally. So I think everybody knows, and this is the most famous topic that we talk since 2020. So COVID-19 pandemic originally came from a virus called a coronavirus. This virus mainly causes a disease among mammals and birds. And there are some coronavirus affect human. Now we have SARS-CoV, MERS-CoV, and the latest one is the COVID-19. SARS-CoV, of course, what first discovered in 2003, if I'm not mistaken, was first discovered in 2003, the SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, while MERS-CoV is Middle East respiratory syndrome. It was first discovered in Middle East in 2013. And while COVID-19 coronavirus disease 2019 is the first discovered here in 2019, and it was the first confirmed case of COVID-19 in Wuhan, China in December 2019. Start from that, it stirs a global worry. And the first case in Malaysia was first discovered on 25th of January 2020. So I was seeing from that the spread here in Malaysia is starting, and the governments have to make a drastic measures. And finally, on 18 March, it was a historic moment in Malaysian history. 18 March 2020, our Prime Minister announced the first MCO to be applied here in Malaysia. So basically, everyone has to locked up in the house. They cannot go to the to work, every industries were closed. They are not allowed to operate. Everyone has to stay in the house for the sake to curb the infection spread. This is basically a timeline chronology about COVID-19 pandemic happens here in Malaysia since March until May. Basically, I would like to say a little bit why what are the governments doing during these 3 months lah. So just now, like I said, March 2020 was the first MCO announced by our Prime Minister, and all industry were asked to stop operate, and ZPT is not accepted. So ZPTs stopped receiving visitors totally, and the Prime Minister announced the MCO, the first MCO, for 2 weeks, and then after 2 weeks, he extended the MCO period. And looking at the situation, our ZPTs are getting, they start to worry. And during April 2020, we received a few letters and pledge from the ZPT because they express their worriness when they are looking at the current situation during that time. And at the same time, we in the PERHILITAN, we can sense that we need to do something. We need to do something because the animals welfare in the zoo is our top priority. And at the early April, slowly my team, our departments make some many engagement with the ZPT through state auditors to get more to get more information about their financial status, about their current situation, how the management, the animal husbandry works, the animal management, how during during that time, during the MCO. So we get all of this information, and we start doing the talking with our top management and also the ministry. And finally, and on May 2020, the ministry approved a sum of fund, a sum of money as the Bantuan Dana Prihatin Kebajikan Hidupan Liar. This is the first time in department's history that we channel some financial aids to our permit holder. It means in this case it's the ZPT lah. This is the first time because we are afraid that during that time we are concerned about the animal welfare. We are afraid that the animals don't have an access to a good diet, a good care, and we are also afraid that our animals and also our keepers who take care of the animals at the ZPT might be infected by the virus. So somehow we need to help our ZPTs to ensure the animal welfare is always in a good condition. So for the Bantuan Dana Prihatin Kebajikan Hidupan Liar governments, the governments already spent about 7.36 million altogether to our ZPTs for these 3 scope of expenditure. This 3 scope of expenditure is a basic reflection about animal welfare. It means that the zoos need the zoo in any circumstances, they need to provide a good food, a good diet. Animal food cannot be stopped. And then the medication, we are concerned about the animal health. So the medication is also part of the animal welfare. There's a basic need. And disinfectant, it is another approach for the governments to ensure that our animals, the wildlife in the zoo, and also the caretakers are healthy. They are not at the open risk to get this virulent disease, this lethal virus. So we ministry, department, ministry, CATSA approve to use this money for this scope of activities. So basically, the government's already spent 7.364 million from 2020 until now, from May 2020 until now. And then departments also take proactive measures to work close with other departments, with other agencies, government agencies, that probably could help our zoo and our ZPT in terms of animal food. So Alhamdulillah, up until today, we managed to distribute to our ZPT 250 tons of seized frozen meat and animal parts. So all of these frozen meat and animal parts, estimated value about $4.1 million ringgit. And we managed to distribute to the ZPT that in need, probably more. We focus on the ZPT that have huge carnivores. So this type of the fund, the financial aids, the bantuan dana prihatin, and also this kind of donation, it's not we try to take care of the animals in the zoo. It's just we want to ease the burden for the ZPT during this hard time. And then ever since the COVID-19 happens, and since March 2020 up until today, there are many issues related to animal condition in the zoo. Some people, they are widely spread throughout papers, media, social, talking about animal welfare. And this situation give us departments a very nerve, it's alarming. And yes, we have to admit there is a few isolated cases happens to our animals in the zoo. This is common because this is just an impact due to the COVID. When the COVID-19 happens, our ZPT need to restructure their organization. Sometimes they need to reconsider, taking more people, taking more workers. They need to reduce the amount, the numbers of the workers. They need to reduce, sometimes they need to reconsider to reduce down the numbers of the animals because they want to survive. They just want to survive throughout this hard time. So this is what PERHILITAN role come into the picture. We did, and up until now we continue doing the monitoring and monitoring on SOP compliance and animal welfare. This is to ensure that our animals are well taken care of. We check the animal condition, the cleanliness, the husbandry, the food, the quality of the food, the quantity of the food, the body score, everything, just to ensure. If some case happen, yes, I have to admit there's a certain case happen related to animal body size. Sometimes we seek help. We engage with that particular ZPT, ask for a justification why this current situation happened, and we reconsider. And we understand that throughout this pandemic COVID, we need to work together for the sake of animal welfare. So this is our role, the PERHILITAN, because we are the only agencies that have the authority to monitor all animal activity, any activities related to animal to wildlife. All right, so that's for what the government has done and contribute. Now I think this is I almost finished my presentation. Now I would like to share with you what are the hopes and aspiration, the government hopes and aspiration for future zoo in Malaysia. So, of course, we are looking towards the future. Despite of this pandemic, the pandemic COVID-19 is no longer pandemic. Probably some experts say it might be, we have to live with it. It's already endemic, so we need to live with COVID-19. We need to be extra careful. So in July 2020, departments, let me explain, let me put some disclaimer here. July 2020 means this not the during MCO. July 2020, the departments with the collaboration with the MASPA is the Malaysian Association Zoological Park and Aquaria is an organization for the Malaysian Zoo and aquatic community. We work together to plan to build a recovery plan workshop. So the aim for this workshop is to produce a recovery plan for the zoo past COVID. So basically, this recovery plan covers these three areas. So the recovery plan must be able to help our ZPTs to identify its financial status. And also the discovery plan must help our ZPT to discover new source of income. Because right now, during the pandemic COVID, the zoos are not open to the public. So they should start to venture new ways to generate income. Now that's why nowadays, a few weeks, a few months lately, we start to see many zoos appear in virtual. So as a Malaysian who loves animals, who cares about our zoo, please support. And the recovery plan also must be able to help our ZPT to improve their management efficiency. Management efficiency here means that since the COVID-19 happened, they need to restructure themselves. So they need to ensure that every workers there in the ZPT work as it is, and sometimes the numbers doesn't mean that it could produce a great job. Because of the efficiency. So throughout the recovery plan, the recovery should help our ZPTs to understand on how they want to improve their management efficiencies. So after the workshop, when we discuss with the top management officer and also from ministry, we, the departments and also the government, the ministry, start to realize that somehow after pandemic COVID-19, there is the need to improve our policies and legislation on zoos establishment. So then there is one new ideas appear, and it starts slowly. People start talking about it slowly right now, and we call it as a model zoo baharu or new zoo model. New model zoo. So model zoo baharu. So what is actually model zoo baharu? So model zoo baharu is a big idea. Is to ensure that our zoos, our local zoo especially, move back towards parallel as other international zoo. Just now, Dr. Felix share with us top 5 best zoo in the world. The nearest one, of course, the Singapore Zoo. So the nearest role that we can look upon is the Singapore Zoo. What they have done, how they contribute, how they play their roles for the community, for the conservation, for the nature. So this model zoo baru is actually a small scale guidelines for our local zoo towards the idea of world-class zoo. When we hear, it means that we at this status, when we look at the world-class zoo is such a huge thing. Sometimes then this is we think that we need to create something a bit smaller it's relatable, is relevant in this current situation. So we call it as a model zoo bar. So our departments hope that throughout the model zoo baru, we could help the local zoo to move towards the world-class zoo. So basically, model zoo baru, we have got 4 strategies right now. We identify 4 strategies towards the world-class zoo. First is we must strengthening the zoo establishment and management legislation. We need to ensure that in the future, we need to ensure whoever wants to build or whoever new zoo that will be built need to have a proper legislation. Then in any zoo's establishment, it's not only under departments, under PERHILITAN's authority. Actually, the state government, the kerajaan tempatan also have their role in zoo establishment. So these top agency need to have one platform and discuss so that we can, work the legislation parallel so that every stakeholders understand and agree about certain zoos establishment. And then our second strategy is to strengthening zoo financial capabilities. This is super important, very important. COVID-19 right now, what happens during the March 2020 is actually an eye-opener event for everybody. So in the future, we want to ensure that our zoo have their own capability to generate income, to sustain themselves. Not only depends on government aid or government grants or public donation. They need to venture, they need to build their own reputation so that people wants to work with them in terms of conservation or any activities that finally would give them benefits in terms of monetary, and so that they can survive in any condition, not only COVID-19. I mean, anything after this, we don't know. It's beyond our imagination. During last March, we never expect that COVID-19 could hit us as bad as what we had today, right? Like today, we got about almost more than 20,000 case, COVID-19 case. We never expect that the case would be this high. So, like, I think that we think that the government think, the departments think that right now is the best time to start educating our current ZPTs and a future ZPT lover. Perhaps they have planned to build a new ZPT that they need to ensure they have the financial capabilities to carry this responsibility. And the third strategy is, of course, to always remind our ZPT to have a good management practices. When you talk about management practices, it's not only animal management. It also covers about the administrative management, the workers, the risk management, the park management, everything, every management area. So the ZPT need to look back at their own SOPs and how they deal, how they run their business every single day. Are they doing the right standard? Maybe one day when the right time comes, maybe one day governments put some target to all ZPTs need to have some sort of certificate MSO 9,000, 1,000 to picturize that they have a good management practices. They need to have some sort of certificates, probably in the future. But right now we haven't done that. We haven't done that for our ZPTs. And last but not least, we must not forget about MASPA. MASPA is the only zoos and aquaria park organization here in Malaysia. So we need to empower MASPA. when we empower MASPA, the automatically our zoos will double. We will empower too. So the MASPA is the best organization that understand zoos, the zoos problem, the zoos operation. So when the governments empower MASPA with grants, so they could help our zoo to develop, and eventually, when all these four strategies meet, uh, the ideas of model zoo baru could be materialized. So I think that is the last slide for my presentation. But before I end my presentation, I'd like to share with you a bit of our group. Ladies and gentlemen out there are not aware that we have so many animal attraction here in Malaysia. We have 33 animal premises. We have 13 and 20 permanent exhibition. So these are the least 12 zoos, and these are our permanent exhibition all around the Peninsula Malaysia, including the So finally, today I would like to take this opportunity. Today is the World Elephant Day. Happy World Elephant Day. And I would like to share once again what Mohamed said, and totally relevant up until today. The way we manage our new animals reflects the nation and its moral. Nation here means us, people in Malaysia, not only the government or other animals. It's us. So the way we treat our animals, it reflects who are we. So thank you. I think that's it, Mr. Moderator. Thank you very much for the.
Okay, thank you very much, Puan Nur Zakia Hanum. I think we face a bit of hiccup towards the end of your presentation. The sound is not really good. But anyway, I think you have presented it nicely, and you have divided your presentation into three scopes: the laws and legislations, the government efforts and contributions, and hope for future zoo in Malaysia. I think the most challenging part, as you mentioned, I think like Dr. Felix mentioned, is this during COVID-19 pandemic, quite challenge. How we can sustain the zoo in Malaysia. And I think you mentioned about the model zoo baru, or the new zoo model, which you mentioned four strategies. And I think one of the perhaps the benchmark that we can put very close to our neighbor country is Singapore. So if we can achieve that benchmark, I think that would be a certain big achievement for the zoos in Malaysia. I think thank you very much, Puan Nur Zakia Anu, for that. The lovely presentation. We have several questions here. I think from the people who join us through Zoom, and I will take up the question. Uh, is from Velayan Subramaniam. I think she has four questions. Four questions. How do you compare Zoo Negara with Singapore Zoo? What are the incidents of COVID positive cases among zoo workers in Malaysian zoos, and in particular to Zoo Negara? Do the local zoos perform COVID tests in the collection, particularly with the cats and primates? And how backwards are we in Malaysia? We talk about zoos. So perhaps I think the Dr. Felix, and perhaps I think Zakia can respond to that.
Okay, Juan, or you want me to respond?
Yeah, yes, please, Dr. Felix.
Okay, so basically when we talk about comparing Zoo Negara and Singapore Zoo, it's always people have been, comparing Zoo Negara and Singapore Zoo. One thing for sure is Singapore Zoo, as I mentioned earlier, is the top 5 in the world. So we are not near that, even though what we are doing is basically in accordance and complying with WAZA. Okay. And then as far as the second one, what are the incidences of COVID positive cases among zoo workers, in particular Zoo Negara? I do not have the actual numbers, but I'm sure that there are some of the workers that is being tested positive for the COVID-19. And then do local zoo perform COVID tests in collection, particularly in cats and primates? That one, so far that I know, no, it's not being done. And then, of course, the last one is how backward are we in Malaysia in zoo, in Malaysian in zoo? So basically, as far as talking about MASPA, the Malaysian Association of Zoological Parks and Aquaria, the zoos and the petting zoo that is being mentioned by Puan Zakia Hanum, we have complied with the Wildlife Conservation Act. And then the Wildlife Conservation Act 2010, it's well received regionally, actually, because some of my colleagues in Thailand Zoo, they did inquire a few, when I was in Zoo Negara, whether they can adopt and introduce the Wildlife Conservation Act more similar to ours here. My answer was at that point in time, it's quite difficult in Thailand because they still have premises that has animal being used as in a circus act. They dress the animal, they subject the animals to unnatural behavior like dancing and all that. So I mentioned to them, if you can take care of that, then it'll be fine. Because I remember when Zoo Negara would do away with the elephant ride, a lot of the public was telling us, you're going to be a very boring zoo. But we have to, we stood our ground, and now it's most of the zoos, especially in Malaysia, we are doing away with using animals for entertainment, right? And then talking about how backward, I mean, I've not, it depends on how you see it. That's how I answer it. Yeah.
Can I go to the following questions? I think the following, I think it's not a question, but I think it is some sort of statements by Velayan again. He said that the oldest zoo in Malaysia is Johor Zoo. Dr. Felix, because in the earlier discussion, I mentioned that it's supposed to be Zoo Taipei. What do you think about this? Is
Yeah,
it
I mean,
Johor Zoo or Zoo Taipei?
as of my knowledge, I don't know about. I mean, Taiping Zoo is actually the oldest zoo in Malaysia itself. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And I'm quite worried about the some of the staff affected with this COVID in Johor Zoo. Yeah, that's what the report says. Okay. Okay. I'm not going to take all the questions and comment by Velayan. Some of that is quite important, then I will take it. How much was given by the government to the smaller zoos or the petting zoos?
Puan Zakia, do you want to answer?
Yes, is this what is that? What Doctor? Can you listen to me, Doctor Felix?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
That the doctor means that the bantuan dana is that he means like how much the government gave the smaller zoo or petting zoo using our bantuan dana.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Actually, we cannot reveal. Actually, for your information, the bantuan dana is we open all of our ZPTs that in need. So any ZPTs that they think that they need extra financial aid, they write to us. They give us the numbers, how much they want, why they want that. So when we talk, we open to our zoo, mean we open to all scales of zoo, from the biggest zoo to the small zoo. But the amount is differ according to Zoo. Because before we release some payments or before we channeling the amounts, we did the study first because we need to manage this money. This is a public money. Then we need to manage this money according to its procedure. Then I think everybody knows on how the government manage their money. So we did studies, we recalculate, we check back what is that the claim or the expense under the scope that was approved, and then we release the amount the money. Actually, for your information, the bantuan dana, we are using the pay and claim system. Pay and claim means that the ZAPT need to purchase first. They purchase the food, the medicine, the disinfectant chemical and stuff. Then they need to claim to the government, claim to us. Then we process. We recalculate, we check all of this purchase, the expenses, ensure that all the documents are proper. Then we start to release the payment. Yes, sometimes there are many situations we have to cut down claims. They have to cut down their claims because it's beyond the approved. They claim for something that they cannot claim for. That is how it works, the bantuan dana. We offer them to all of the zoo, but only the one who in need write to us, and we entertain. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Probably,
Okay. Yes,
Prof,
Dr.
Prof
Felix?
can I add a bit on this?
Yes, please.
Okay, so basically when you talk about how much was given by the government and all that, I think before the government went in, there was already zoos or individual zoo that do their own donation drive. Okay, some zoos are very fortunate. They are, because of the locality, they are, like for example Zoo Negara, so they do get so much hype and publicity, and because they are one of the, because they carry the name and they are situated in the central region, so it's much easier for them to get all the funds and donation. And then of course the other zoos further away from KL will feel, this is not fair. So the thing is, it's very when the government wanted to give the grant, it's very difficult for them to come up with a formula how much this zoo should get, how much that zoo would get. Okay, and then but then there's a pressing need to have that money. So basically, what we see on the papers is like Zoo Negara, Zoo Negara, Zoo Negara. But having said that, actually Zoo Negara also did extend some of the donation, especially the food, to other zoos like Malacca Zoo. They even call up Sarangwaya, Pasir Gudang, the Formosa Safari, and all those. They do try to distribute all the donation and all that. So I think the thing is, the awareness should be there. I mean, like I mentioned in my talk, the awareness, to create awareness that each zoos in Malaysia, especially those that Puan Zakia I know mentioned, are what they call the public knows where they are, how they are. So basically, the function of tonight talk is basically to tell the public, tell those online, saying that okay, the zoos, what are we facing during the pandemic and all that. So that is what I want to add. Aside from, it's quite, like Puan Zakia mentioned, it's not easy to manage the public funds because you have to be held accountable. We understand that, but then again, being some zoos being in the center part, they get a lot of donations. So other zoos will start saying that it's not fair. How come we're not getting and all that? So that's the problem that we're having at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Felix. I think before we go to the other question by Ali Ahmad, just now, Puan Zakia, you mentioned about, I think you cannot reveal the amount, and you have this pay and claim systems. And once you receive the claim, then you be, I mean, scrutinize whatever the details on. So just a very quick, respond to that. If you may answer, how long it will take from the day they submit for the claim and they get back the money?
Let me give you a scenario. Usually, we will pay the claim at we we ask the ZPT to submit all the documentation, the receipt, every proof, and that they did the expenses at the every early months before 7 every month. So we will process within 14 days the document, and if there is no issues or there is no technical problem with the claim, the payment will be distributed after 2 weeks. That's the longest time. But however, there are some scenario, sometimes there is some technical issue. The receipt is unclear, there is no, the date is not clear for our audit to recheck. The payment we need some justification and clarification why they did that kind of purchase. So those things, when we need when we did some query to the ZPTs, that requires some time, a longer time. That's why sometimes we need the longest time we've been experienced to channel the money right after they pass the documents, the claim. The longest, almost a month, because it's very important to ensure that all the documents are according to the procedure.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we go to question by Mr. Ahli Ahmad. I heard not too long ago, two specialists from UPM were tasked to look into welfare for zoo in Malaysia. What are the final report from their assessment? And do they have a follow up on these tasks for setup? Maybe, Dr. Felix?
Two specialists from UPM. All
Do you know about this, Felix? I haven't heard about this before.
or this one, if I'm not mistaken, is Dr. Ruben and Dr. What's the wife name again? It's more on the enrichment. I think this was before the enforcement of the Wildlife Conservation Act 2010, because we at the same time when we want to enforce the act, we must ensure that at least the zoo can comply with it. That is the reason why we call in the two specialists to work on the welfare. So basically their report they did submit, and basically it was used as a guideline for us to do the audit of the zoos for compliance, because all zoos, especially those under MASPA, will have to undergo the audit by the Department of Wildlife in order to get their operating permit issued on an annual basis. So basically, yes, the answer, yes, the report was being used. And the second one, are they follow up on this task force setup? Task force, I'm not so sure about the task force, but their report was being used as a guide to do the audit after that for the compliance of the Wildlife Conservation Act. Yes, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Felix. Um, we go to the following question. May I know what permits or legal documents are needed to start a zoo in Malaysia? Oh, he's going to open a zoo, this guy, but anonymous attendee, so we don't know who is this. Huh? So who would like to respond that? Perhaps Zakia?
Yeah, she's typing the answer now, I think.
Basically, if you this explanation, you can simply write to us, then we can explain through email. It's easier lah to anonymous attendee.
Okay, okay, thank you. The following questions within what can be some examples of alternative source of income for Zoo in this pandemic?
Like alternative source of income. Okay, during the pandemic, there's a lot of usage of social media. So we can use social media, Facebook, or even Insta, even TikTok. But basically, it's more on FB or Instagram where they can, number one, they can source for donation. Number two, what they can do for virtual, they call it the virtual zoo, like the one in Singapore Zoo. What it does is it has what they call a webinar with kids in a classroom, but the person in Singapore Zoo is actually with the animal, and then it's being paid by the what they call the class. Instead of them coming to the zoo, we bring the zoo via online to them. That is one source of income. And then knowing the pandemic now, giving money is everybody is a global problem. So basically, money is not easy to come by. Another way that probably we can think of is the one that is, I think the I should say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, the one that is not affected in terms of revenue are those of the telcos, Maxis, Celcom, DG. So what we can do is the zoo can approach them, you know, they can, maybe they don't have to give in terms of cash, but they can give in terms of how many gigabytes of exposure. You know, it will help in that sense of word, because I think for those telcos there with the student online, university online, you know, there are money is coming in, maybe not as much as before this, but they are still having lots of money. So basically, maybe they do not want to release money to the zoos, but at least they can sponsor in terms of how many gigabytes, how many what do you call what is the term we use? Yeah, I mean, uh, provide free gigabytes for the zoos social media. That is one way, and then the zoo can, instead of pay that to the telcos, they can use it for virtual zoo, like I mentioned earlier, get donation and all that. They help exposures, and then of course there's many other ways that we can, because normally in pandemic, when you are facing hardship, that is where your creativity and innovativeness will be jumping up the roof. So basically, but for tonight, I think that is a few the few things that I can think of. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Felix. You want to add any more, Puan Zakia?
I think Dr. Felix already said all, but I think maybe can start to look as a passive income as part of their new income. You know, when they invest money, and then that is also a new income for them. They can use during the hardship. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you. We have exceeded our time, but I would like to take these two last questions. To be fair, I think despite we're talking about the animal zoo as well as the well-being of the animals, I think quite a number of pupils. I think we have about 30 participating through Zoom as well. I don't know how many on the FB Live, but these questions come from Imran Aziz. Doctor, this question addressed to Dr. Felix, both to Dr. Felix and Puan Nur Zakia. What will happen to zoo animals if the zoo somehow need to be closed or stop operating due to lack of funding, especially during this pandemic era? What will happen?
It's a scary thought, yes, but me being in this line, I hope that it will not happen, but hope is not good enough. Because the thing is, as we know, I mean, there's a lot of people who are against zoo establishment because they do not understand the reason why. So basically, when you talk about zoo, as I mentioned in my talk just now, is like some may agree to disagree with me, but the way I see it, because the habitat, the natural habitat gets smaller and smaller every day. And then even our own forest gets fragmented. Okay. Our lion tiger, when I started in the zoo 2006, there were about 500. The latest survey was probably about 200, maybe less. Okay, so we have to understand that the habitat is getting less and less because us human beings, we the Homo sapiens, are the one, encroaching into their. If we do it in a manageable, sustainably, yes, it's okay. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Because when I was working with PERHILITAN, using the big data analytics, trying to predict and manage animal-wildlife conflict. So there are various stakeholders that we have to work with. For example, you talk about the forest, the in the federal level, they will say, okay, this can be done, blah, 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 blah. Once you go to the state have the right to decide what they want to do with the forest. That is why I mentioned in my presentation just now, it must be a multi-sectoral effort where all the tasks stakeholder have to sit down and do. I mean, whether we like it or not, we have to do it. Okay, it's difficult, yes. Look at how we are handling the COVID-19. So basically, it's almost similar to if you throw the question to me, I would say now we are even talking about conserving our animals using cryogenics, surrogacy. Cryogenics mean you freeze the sperms and all that. Because going back to the 200 tigers that we find in the wild, even some of my friends who are in UPM, they even question how is the productivity level of this animal. We have learned, just like our species, the rhino, the Sumatran rhino, that have been extinct in our country, especially in Sabah, because it's almost too late. So we must learn from that. So all the various stakeholders have to work together. And then I usually joke with the PERHILITAN and all of that, saying that the reason why is that despite having Mahatma Gandhi punya quote saying that if you want to see how the government manage the people, you see the animal. I told them it's just because the animals don't go for the pilihan raya, PRU. Simple as that. But the thing is, it may be it looks as if going to a dead end, but there is hope, yes. But of course, like I mentioned, it has to be a multi-sectorial effort together. Otherwise, we will lose a lot of the animals in the wild, the endemic species, just like every now and then you can read about roadkills to our poor tapes being knocked down in the highway. People, even some of the elephant got knocked down, and then some of the elephant being poisoned in Sabah. It's very sad to hear, but we don't. What I'm trying to say is we are not giving up hope. There are so many ways that we can do, but if the zoo closes down, I hope it doesn't come to that. I mean, that's it for the animal. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Zakia, do you want to add?
Okay, so what happened to the animals once the zoo need to close down due to COVID because they cannot survive. So basically, when this is something that we don't want our ZPT to happen lah right now, because currently government, all of us are struggling. However, when it happened, government is the important entity to take all of this animal and care for them. But before that, we shouldn't forget about MASPA. This is the role of MASPA. MASPA need to engage with their members. Maybe before they start closing the zoo, they need to consult with the MASPA, and the MASPA probably could help to channeling these animals to any caretakers that are willing to care about the certain animals. And then the last resort will be the government. So when all the precaution, all the precaution step already taken, the MASPA already done their roles, everybody has done their roles, then they can send back us to us. The government, the department PERHILITAN is always there for the animals. When the government keeps the animal, we must keep it in within our facility, and then maybe we must start to consider the idea of sending back certain animals back to their origin country, especially the exotic animals. Can you imagine departments keeping giraffe behind their office? We cannot imagine that. Let's not imagine. Let's hope for that thing not to happen. So when the government keep this animal, probably there are many considerations that we need to think. Also, the people, the public also need to reconsider this thing too. Probably we need to send back this animal to the wild, and maybe we need to manage them as it is. But let me remind you, Mr. Moderator, let me remind you and other ladies and gentlemen, just now I present about the idea of Model Zoo Baru. So Model Zoo Baru aims to have a zoo that have capabilities to run zoo. They understand their roles, they understand the spirit of keeping this animal within their establishment. So that's why in future we don't want anybody who just think that zoos for business. They just want to manipulate this animal for business only. No, we want somebody who want to build the zoo, to understand the spirit, to understand their roles, to involve with the conservation work. That's the aim for the Model Zoo Baru. But if what the anonymous asked, Encik Imran just now asked, but if the animals need, but right now if any zoos need to be closed, somehow governments need to prepare. We have to prepare.
Okay, thank you. This last question from Azrina Abdul Halim, and perhaps after that, I would just like to ask the question that I raised to Dr. Felix in the beginning. Exactly how many zoos do we have in Malaysia? And what about private zoos? Are they bound to any laws and acts? And perhaps Dr. Felix, the one that I mentioned, with regard to the safari nights, when you have visitors to the zoo at night time, so does it affect the life of the animals? Okay, perhaps both Dr. Felix and Dr. Zakia respond, and you can wrap up your presentation. Okay.
Okay, with regards to the number of zoos and ZPTs, I think Zakia will have a better picture of numbers. But as far as those under MASPA, because I'm actually affiliated to MASPA, we only have 22 members, right? And then that is why many people are not happy. It's quite difficult for them to join MASPA. The basic reason is we want to make sure that our members do not just think of business. When you want to close down, that's it. We leave everything to the government. So that is why, in order for you to join MASPA, you have to give us what is your actual long-term planning, especially when you talk about conservation breeding program, because we do not want the animals to be, once you close down, all the animal will be sent by the truckloads to Jabatan PERHILITAN in KL. No doubt, one of our members, due to unforeseen circumstances, have to close down, but we managed to rescue or relocate those animals among the MASPA members itself. So that is how we mitigate just in case if any of the zoos want to close down. And then that is the reason why it's quite difficult for those who wants to affiliate or be a member of MASPA. You really have to go through a stringent process of checking before that. All right, and then talking about night safari, if you were to look an example in Singapore Zoo, they have a separate place for night safari, just for nocturnal animals. Nocturnal animals are basically those that are active during the night. And in the case of, for example, Taiping Zoo and Malacca Zoo, they do have animals that are active during the night. So these are the ones that are being displayed. And they have planned the route of people going through the zoo at night, not to disturb those animals that are working, or rather active during the day. So that before they open the night safari, they will call PERHILITAN, and even I also come in to audit to make sure that it doesn't disturb the animals. So yeah, I mean, people want to open the zoo like 7-Eleven 24/7 because the more people, I mean, there's always people, there's always money, but we have to consider the animals. At the same time, the keepers. When you talk about zoo animal, people always leave aside the zookeepers. Zookeepers are the one that is, to me, are as important as the zoo animals in the zoo, because they are the one who actually manage the animals. And during the pandemic, they are the one who's so stressful in a sense, like number one, what they call the numbers are being cut, meaning they have to take an extra workload to look after the animals. At the same time, they have to be sure that if they go back to their family, they do not bring. Another thing I like to stress here is that you talk about frontliners. People talk about COVID-19 frontliners. We are also actually the frontliners, because why? A lot of the disease that is being mentioned by Puan Zakia is all from the animals. It's from, so meaning we are the ones should be, like you talk about the frontliners being vaccinated first. So are the zookeepers, but unfortunately, it's not done that way. Yeah. One Zakia.
Okay, thank you. Puan Zakia, please.
Question asked about how many zoos in Malaysia, how many zoos, private zoos. Departments endorse about 33 permits for permanent exhibitions and also operation of zoo. Altogether, there are 33 ZPTs. We only permit animal exhibition that exhibit animals that stated under the Wildlife Conservation Act. So for any private zoo or government zoo that only display animals that doesn't listed under the Wildlife Conservation Act, they don't need our permit. So to be honest, I don't know how many zoos here in Malaysia from Sabah and Sarawak, including Sabah and Sarawak, but there are 33 zoos that have been given the permit by the departments here only in Peninsula. That's it. I hope that my answer could answer the question.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's wrap up our webinar tonight under what we call it Zoo and Animal Wellbeing during the COVID-19 pandemic. On behalf of IAIS Malaysia, we would like to thank again Dr. Mohamed Danial Felix bin Abdullah, the former director of Zoo, Deputy Director Zoo Negara, as well as Puan Nur Zakia Hanum Binti Mohd Noh from PERHILITAN. I think the discussion is very, very interesting. I think we have the participants in the Zoom still joining us until the end of the program, and I don't know how many are following us in the FB Live. So when we talk about people who are affected by COVID-19, so do the animals. And I think the discussion today gave a very good input how to sustain and to make sure the well-being of the animals is I think we the human beings are the one who take care. I think on that note we would like to say today is the World Elephant Day, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, World Elephant Day, and we hope that the elephants can sustain. Especially, I know in Sabah perhaps, but in Peninsular Malaysia we are facing problems there. So thank you again to both of you. So inshallah we see you next in our future program. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good night.